Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well, thank you.
Good.
But we're going to deal with some problems that aren't doing so well.
A couple problems, yes.
The country faced a couple bumps this weekend, and sorting all that out is a challenge. I think we can talk sensibly about some of it, but I think there's still some unanswered question. You know, what I've seen in the less than a year, matter of fact, when everybody recognized that the bubble was no longer going to be blown up anymore, and the stock market crashed and the financial crisis set in, and a lot of problems happened a long time even before it was obvious what was happening with the coronavirus. And that to me, of course, is very, very big because it can bring down the whole world financial empire. But that's not what's on in the news right now because there's nobody demonstrating about the Federal Reserve, and everybody needs the money, and nobody's going to say, well, we don't want the printing presses around Republicans and Democrats or whatever. But when it came to the coronavirus, this was a much bigger deal, and we have a lot of ramifications there. And I want to talk a little bit today about the medical ramifications of the shutdown, and that to me should be the news because how disastrous the whole thing turned out to be. But I think we're starting to get information that it was overkill. Probably didn't need it. They lied to us. Who was responsible for this? And people are starting, even in the authorities, are starting to talk about it. Sometimes it's out loud, and sometimes they're overheard to be saying, this is big fake. And I think it is. I think it's a big fake on the American people and the world, and yet it's been a series because we have come to the conclusion that the lockdown itself, not the virus, but the lockdown has been a disaster, and it's still with us. But what happens right in the middle of this, just not even hardly a week ago, we had that ruthless killing by a policeman, and it did get attention, and rightfully so. And all I can think of is that about our programs that we've done in the past to try to warn people that that there is a lot of brutality with the police. There's overkill related to the drug war, but this was a little bit more evil than some of the break-ins on drug war, excesses. But anyway, this turns out to be a big issue. I mean, that's what got a lot of people out in the streets, and they're demonstrating, starting fires. The country, it just seemed like somebody just turned on a switch. And I keep thinking, I wonder, what if there was some planning on this? And I keep thinking about the billions, like $80 billion we spend on trying to keep us safe by knowing everything about American citizens who aren't breaking the law. They know everything about us. But, we talked about that back in after 9/11. We were spending all that money and no warning whatsoever, that whole thing. But there could be a couple explanations for that. But the American people didn't get their money's worth there. So all of a sudden, we have this, no warning whatsoever. Now it looks like it's a little bit more than just spontaneous. And that, I think, is what we have to start thinking about. But that is in the news today. It's going to be in the news for a while longer. It's very, very dangerous because sometimes these things get out of control. There was a fire near the White House last night, so something like that could really, really make an explosion. And I think what's going on here can't do our country and our system of government any good when they see this going around the world. And I keep thinking, as most people do, think in terms of politics. And already, people even before the riots occurred helped to stir up the riot. It's all Trump's fault. He did that. It was his fault. But and I keep thinking, what will be the political ramifications of all this? My first thought was, because I remember 1968 so well, the Democrats were in shambles because they were seen as being more supportive of the rioting that was going on, which side was on the good side or bad side, that's a different story. But Nixon was on the side of law and order. They won the election overwhelmingly. So offhand, there could be people whether they were involved early on or whether they just took advantage of it. I know there's people out there. If you can run into these far leftists saying, well, even if Biden is a rapist, we need him because we hate Trump.
Yeah.
They didn't use that word, but that's
Yeah.
what they're saying. We hate Trump so much, but we'd put a rapist in office. So they would be capable, of using this in order just to destroy Trump. But they better not get too cocky, because I don't think anybody knows exactly what's going to turn out in November.
Yeah, or August, really. For
Yeah,
that matter,
August
because
might be it.
Every week something new happens. But it's always interesting to study the media response, the media's role in something like the riots we've seen over the past few days, because it seems very clear that the media, the social media, they're all urging Americans to take sides, to be divided. Are you with the thin blue line? Are you with Black Lives Matter? This team versus that team. And it all seems like, to me at least, like a diversionary tactic to keep people focused on something different, to keep people in an acrimonious relationship with each other. So I always wonder how much that is manipulated. You know, you had a lockdown that destroyed the economy. It put 40 million Americans out of work, something like this. It took away their sense of security for the future, and then it locked them in the house for 3 months. And then it seems to me that after this killing, it was the media that lit the match. You know, the explosives were already there in the situation, and the media repeatedly showing this terrible murder over and over again was just lit the match and exploded the whole situation. But it is interesting, because it seems like there was, and this has happened in the past, there was a genuine outrage among every decent person watching the video of this person being basically killed. But then almost immediately, like you say, and this is fascinating, it seemed like this was all hijacked by a very, very well-organized group. And actually, I've seen several videos on Twitter and elsewhere. They are all over the place, where there was one where a young African-American woman, she started yelling at this white guy who was breaking down the windows in a building. She said, "What are you doing? This is our neighborhood. We're protesting. Don't do this in our name. We're going to get blamed for it. You're destroying our neighborhood." And even the protests themselves, I think in Minneapolis, the riot itself was started by a white guy walking down and breaking out the windows of an auto parts store. And it was an African-American guy, I think it was trying to stop him. "What are you doing?" So there's all these very, very suspicious things. And I think our feeling whenever we see something like this is not to jump in on which side or the other, but to say, what is really going on here? And it's perplexing.
Yeah. And Trump has spoken out about this and says that they need to know more about Antifa and find out if they're involved. And that is a very suspicious group. And whether they originated it or join in, it's a dangerous situation. And I don't think that the libertarian position of nonviolence is being heard, unfortunately. But that whole principle of nonviolence, it works better if it's a prohibition. It doesn't work once the violence breaks out, because what do you do when you see these people breaking these windows down and mobbing and stealing and all this? You can't have somebody's going to have to confront them. And that's what finally happened in the '68, and the confrontation didn't help the Democrats, and so they will be confronted. But then again, who does it? Is it going to be the federal government, the federal army? We know that federal military officials ended up in Kent State, and that went badly. But I do also want to talk about the medical ramifications of the lockdown, which has been compounded by this. And we've talked about this a little bit, but it did exactly the opposite of what was intended. The lockdown was intended to protect the people. They knew what was right, and the people could get sick if they weren't taken care of. So the principle was that the protectors had to be the government, and therefore the government will have the rules, and they would order the people around. So they ordered the quarantine. And it was completely wrong. And we have a whole list here of all the things they did that I consider just really dumb and backfired on them. Is like for instance, the quarantine. They quarantine healthy people and put the sick people into a nursing home and made the facilities more deadly. So this whole idea that you can turn this over to the government. When I saw what happened for medical care once the lockdown started, it reminded me of an economic switch they turned on in 1971 with wage and price controls. And I've mentioned this before. That is when the economy went like that. Nothing was available because prices are rigged, and if prices are rigged, you have to go to a black market. And this is what happened here when this lockdown occurred. The medical system, because they interfered with it, just closed down. And now we're hearing all these stories, billions of dollars lost to hospitals going broke, people not getting medical care. How many cancer patients didn't get their treatment?
Yeah.
It goes on. And some of them that were responsible for that, oh, well, we didn't realize that this would happen. Of course, they should realize that governments aren't good central planners. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a perfect example of what central economic planning is like if it's total in a medical system. And even if the whole country's not there, this time it was in the medical system. And in a way, this has been incremental. The government involvement in medicine didn't occur just this past week. We set the stage for this because really the furthest point we've gotten along with universal care and moving in that direction was Obamacare.
Yeah.
But didn't we have the Republicans there to resist that? And,
Yeah.
we had them in the Supreme Court, and they said, oh, that's legal. You know, you can do whatever you want. Just don't call it a penalty. Just call it a tax. That was Roberts, of course.
Yeah.
And they legalized that. So the assumption was that the government has a responsibility to divvy out the medical care. And it's a disaster. It's pure socialism. And if they want anybody who is reasonable thinking should look at this and say, well, I want to help the sick people. I want to take care of the sick people. They ought to look at this. This is how you take care of sick people, and look at what happens. First, to justify it, they had to tell a lot of lies.
Yeah.
And then when it happened, they did the wrong things, and it becomes, it's delusional. And then it becomes sort of a patriotic duty, like the mask. What terrible symbolism that is. And I don't believe for a minute that saved one life. And the evidence is starting to come out to show that it's detrimental and may have killed people, because, I look at it as a barrier. First, it has to slow down the exhaling of CO2. I thought CO2 was bad, but no, the CO2 doesn't go out. The oxygen has more trouble coming in, and these masks won't keep out the viruses anyway, So it makes no sense. It's everything they've done seems to be so symbolic, and it turns out that the enemy, the invisible virus, probably is not going to end up being all that critical, especially when they don't even they lie about all the records.
Yeah.
Here, what do? They say, well, everybody dies from coronavirus. Just put it down. If they sneezed last week, it's the coronavirus.
Yeah.
And so it's so deceitful. It has, it is a lesson. I just wish the American people would realize if you want central economic planning of any sort, or in medicine, which we're really one-party payment, we're having that. This is what kind of medical care you're going to get.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is interesting, there were no heart attacks in May, I think, right?
Yeah, right.
Because nobody went to the hospital when they had one. Normally, if you had a minor heart attack, you'd go in, you'd have a procedure done, and you'd live for a long time. The other thing I'm hearing of, Dr. Paul, there's some reports of people working in retail who are forced to wear masks, and you know about this issue better than me, but they're coming up with pleurisy, because they're having this inflammation, this bacterial infection in the lining of their, esophagus or something, because of this always breathing this in.
Yeah.
So there are side effects, but there are even bigger ones than that. And you talk about central planning when it comes to medical care. I think the poster child is what's happening in New York. And more is coming out about what Cuomo did to New York, and it's just criminal. Betsy McCaughey wrote in Fox News over the weekend a piece. She talked about an estimated 10,000 nursing home residents in New York died with this virus. And Cuomo, of course, he said, don't blame me for following what Trump said. But she points out that Trump never said, put people back in their home if they're sick with COVID from the hospital. He said if there's a hospital battling it, you can still take them home as long as they're not ill. The CDC on March 18th warned against returning COVID-sick patients to their nursing homes. On March 25th, a week later, Cuomo mandated that they be returned to their homes. And this murderous policy, you can't say anything other than that, this murderous policy from March 25th continued through May 10th of putting sick people in their homes, and that's why they were just basically turning into slaughterhouses. So there's government planned care for you.
And we've seen some statistics when you remove the people who died relating to the nursing home.
Yeah.
The percentage of people that died is just really, really low. And that's where the large number of like 70 or 80% are related to that situation, which is artificial. But you know, another thing that the government did under these circumstances is dealing with chloroquine. You know, that is a disaster. Instead of anybody popping up, you know, before this whole thing started, that was a true expert on chloroquine, they had quite a few because it's been used for a long time. It's inexpensive. It's helped on malaria, and we've already, matter of fact, we had one doctor on our program that had been using it very successfully. And but it turns out that the science that I've read, that I believe, is that chloroquine is very, very good, but it isn't for terminal patients. It's not when you put them on a respirator and give them chloroquine. Both are wrong, and then they end up dying. But the chloroquine, I think it was even in Texas, one of the states where they said that it was always, you know, sold with a prescription, and it was very cheap, and you could get it. But all of a sudden, they made it illegal to do it. They weren't allowed to use it unless you prove to them, bring in the certificate, and show that they have coronavirus. And so it went in the opposite direction, where the market was in many ways working for years. They provided the medication. It was at the right price. The doctor-patient relationship dealt with who should take it and who shouldn't take. And now, we have results now that it was completely wrong. This is why, not that this is news to anybody, but governments aren't very good at managing anything. You know, they have a little trouble. They have a little trouble with the mail. They have a little trouble delivering peace around the world, and they have a little trouble delivering an honest currency. It's why there's so much trust put into it. It's delusional. I think delusion is a good word to use on all this, and it's delusional to think that what we have done, and it's not that many months, fortunately, the argument that this virus will work its way out, and they're going to have a hard time lying about the statistics now, and it's going to be over. And but people say, the do-gooders say, well, you're never going to get rid of your mask, and we have to get you, and you're going to have identification that you took a vaccine, or you're immune to this. But they want the vaccines, and that's the way with chloroquine. They say, we're working on new drugs. We're working on new drugs. Well, why don't you just let people work it out? Why shouldn't the companies work it out? But not the government. So you have hundreds and hundreds of companies working on the drugs and vaccines, and you know there's billions of dollars going into this, and by the time they get something, it's going to be all over, hopefully, but not the desire to run people's lives, run their medical care, and be dictators of everything that we do.
Yeah. And if you feel a little bit conspiracy-minded today, you'd start to wonder if maybe all of these riots were meant to divert attention from the fact that the dominant narrative on coronavirus is being disintegrated. It really is. And you've asked a question on the show before. How is it that there was a worldwide hysterical reaction to the coronavirus? Almost everyone. A couple of countries excluded, Belarus and Tanzania I can think of, and Sweden kind of in a way. Other than that, they all panicked and did the same thing. Well, there was a piece in Off Guardian, which is a great publication, and they documented 3 important developments that I think are ripping the narrative apart. The first one came out of Russia, May 26th. Dr. Alexander Myashnikov, who's the head of Russia's coronavirus information, he gave an interview about coronavirus and everything, and then when he finished, he thought the interview was over and the camera was off. When he thought it was clicked off, it was still on, and he said, "This is all BS. It's all exaggerated. It's an acute respiratory disease with minimal mortality. Why has the world been destroyed? I don't know." Very interesting. The second one is leaked emails between 2 top health officials in Denmark. top civil servant and the head of the Danish Health Authority, where they were fighting back and forth about the politicization versus the actual science. And in those emails that were leaked, it's a big thing now in Denmark. Here's one of the quotes. The Danish Health Authority continues to consider that COVID-19 cannot be described as a generally dangerous disease, as it does not have either usually a serious course or a high mortality rate. And then the last one is in Germany, Dr. Paul. This is even more fascinating because this is what the riots in Germany about, the protests there. It's not about the lockdown, it's about the false narrative. The Interior Ministry in Germany commissioned a 93-page report titled Analysis of the Crisis Management. They brought in a scientific panel from outside universities of medical professionals and others, and they came to some really incredible conclusions about what was happening. And it was leaked by a whistleblower named Stephen Cohen, who has been fired since then. But this is interesting. Here's just a couple points, Dr. Paul, that this Interior Ministry Commission report came to. The dangerousness of COVID-19 was overestimated. Probably at no point did the danger posed by the new virus go beyond the normal level. People who die from corona are essentially those who would statistically die this year because they have reached the end of their lives and their weakened bodies can no longer cope with any random everyday stress. Worldwide, within a quarter of a year, there's been no more than 250,000 deaths from COVID-19, compared to 1.5 million deaths during the influenza wave of 2017, 2018, just a couple of years ago. The danger is obviously no greater than that of many other viruses. There's no evidence that this was more than a false alarm. And finally, from this German report, commissioned by the German government, a reproach could go along these lines. During the corona crisis, the state has proved itself as one of the biggest producers of fake news.
And that's for sure.
Amazing.
You know, hysteria, when it comes and hits a society, comes quickly, it engulfs people, and it's based on fear. And that is certainly what happened. This is a pretty good example of that. And then, you know, there's the religious political zeal that goes along with this, that if you don't do it, you are a very, very bad person. And the one thing that comes of this is watch your neighbor. If anybody's breaking the rules,
that's right.
That is really evil. And it happens, you know, oh, he did this, and individuals, you know, impose their will on. They say, what are you doing there? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you following the rules? And they'll turn people in for this. And also, it reminds me of the story, we may have mentioned this, is you know, there was one church that wasn't following the rules of the authoritarians that were all wrong, didn't even have the authority to write these rules. They don't have any laws behind it. And somebody went in and started complaining, you people don't even follow the rules, you don't even follow the rules. And I don't know, but nobody knows exactly who did the burning, but that same church soon got burnt down. Burnt down because you were bending the rules you actually thought for yourself. So this is just horrible, because you turn people against people. When it really gets bad, when you're under fascism, you get people to actually, you know, turn against your family. You know, because it becomes like a religious effort, and politics politics can become very religious. And they believe in this, and then all of a sudden they're the authoritarians, and it's their job to turn you in, because how can we allow you to go out and play softball and be happy when you shouldn't be doing that? And, you know, arresting people. Why, there was one episode where somebody decided, well, you know, I like the beach. We're capable, we're close enough to the beach. Take your lawn chair and go down and sit on the beach. Didn't happen here, but it happened someplace. By himself, sitting on the beach. He came and got arrested. I mean, that is hysteria. That is hysteria. Very, very damaging. So that's the atmosphere, really, of why people are on edges. It's part of this mental disease that comes about at the same time. Then you have some justifiable complaints about policemen way overreacting, and all of a sudden that explodes, and we have a mess on our hands. And I can't remember when it exactly ended in the 60s, but it didn't go away overnight. It took a while and leaves a lot of scarring.
Yeah.
You know, there'll be a lot of scars from this, and unfortunately, people will, be picking sides. You mentioned early on that people are always looking to pick sides, and of course, we pick sides. We don't pick sides between Republicans or Democrats or whatever economic thing. We pick sides between violence, aggression. That if they only followed that one rule, thou shalt not initiate aggression against anybody.
Yeah.
Don't hurt anybody and don't steal from anybody. The world would be at peace, but unfortunately, not many people are paying attention to that.
Not these days, Dr. Paul. And I'll just close with a couple things, and this is not my original thought. I wish I could claim credit for it, but it's sort of ironic. It's very ironic that government agents killed a gentleman for attempting to pass a forged $20 note when governments themselves are the biggest forgers in the world. That's pretty ironic. But I have to close with one thing, because it goes into the category of never let a crisis go to waste. This is good old Susan Rice. Remember her, the neocon, Obama's neocon national security advisor, who's up to her eyebrows in the faking of the evidence against Michael Flynn and others, probably should be in jail. Well, she went on TV because as long as you say the right things, you get to go on TV. And here's what she said about the riots, what's happening in the U.S. She said, "I'm not reading the intelligence today or these days, but based on my experience, this is right out of the Russian playbook." So forget about everything. Forget about the murder of this guy. Forget about the lockdown. It's all Putin.
Well, they could have blamed the Chinese. They do a lot of harm too, but too many people still believe that too. We talk about socialism. I talked about it and mentioned it, and that's when the government owns the means of production and they control everything. But there's a lot of different aspects of that, different kinds, because there's a fascist type of socialism where the companies might still own things, but the government has complete and total control. And I think what's going on here now is corporatism at its worst. It's not socialized because the companies still have a lot to say about some of these things going on, because if they can close you down from selling chloroquine and at the same time get a huge subsidies for developing a new drug or a new vaccine, these are corporations involved. And the one reason why I like to use the word corporatism, it connotes, something not very good. They do this because I like to use it is because the left does not like corporatism either. And I think it sort of can bring people together. But if you're always arguing for the current standard of free markets, what we have, where the Republican Party support corporatism almost like the Democrats, and they're responsible for the condition of the medical system just as much as the Democrats, because they generally got away with more, and the Republicans were more alert when the Democrats were doing it. But corporatism is something that is bad. People have to understand it. It's a little bit different than pure socialism, but it's every bit as bad. It does harm, and I think it's the source of our friction right now, because the financial system, along with corporatism, has made it so that the wealth in this country has been divided between two classes, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and I believe that. And of course, that is only the left that causes that to happen, but not true. Not true. It's the system. It's the system of corporatism. It's the system of inflationism and the Federal Reserve and budget deficits, all these things that are endorsed by both political parties. So this is what we want to help do, and that is identify where the real problems are. And I think it's the partnership between big business and the deep state with government that really is a threat to our liberties. And we would suggest that if you accept this principle of non-aggression, that we'd be a lot better off. A lot of people do, but boy, I'll tell you what, it gets lost in the fog when you see what's going on today, because it looks like the aggression and the violence is the only thing that they want to use. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't make the case for nonviolence, and that is that resistance is fine and dandy. We need it, but it needs to be nonviolent, or it just deteriorates and gets much worse, and we're liable to get something worse than we have now if it's just done through violence. But the principles still very important. The principles of freedom and individual liberty, those are key. If they're not endorsed, you end up with what you're watching on TV every day: the government running medicine, a financial system coming apart because of inflationism, and then you have the overreaction of policemen and doing terrible things. So that is exactly opposite of what would occur in a society that endorsed non-aggression. So that is what we will work on and encourage, and we will continue our program with your help, which we thank you. Is that if you want peace and prosperity, you have to accept the idea of individual liberty and self-reliance and responsibility. That makes a big difference too. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.